Okay, are we good to go? Janet, should we start?
Let's go.
All right. I want to welcome you, Janet, here with us. Janet Harold Stovall. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing the complete name appropriately. Feel free
It's
to
Janet
correct me.
Stovall. That's fine. It's Janet Stovall.
So, Janet, thank you so much. With all this time difference, 7 seas apart, it's really great to have you finally here with our leadership conversation series at Ungender that we are, constantly doing with individuals like you who have stood as well as made a mark when we talk about conversations on diversity and inclusion. And once again, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, and before anybody starts, even thinking, because diversity and inclusion, a lot that needs to be spoken about it. And at Ungender, of course, we are doing it on a day-to-day basis. There's one thing which was very prominent, Janet, that caught my eye. You are one of the few Fortune 500 speech writers of color, right? And that's a very specific and niche thing that you have mentioned in your profile also. And I want
Absolutely.
to start this conversation right there and with that only. Too many things mixed into this. One of the few Fortune 500 speech writers of color. How does it all describe you in terms of what you have been up to for so many years of your life?
Well, speech writing is something that I came to, like most speech writers, you generally come to it later in life because you have to live a little bit to be in a position to sort of be another person's voice. You got to find your own voice first. So most speech writers are a little bit more mature as writers. But the reason you find so few speech writers of color is because there's been a belief, and it's a relatively valid one, that a speechwriter, in order to speak in somebody else's voice, needs to look like them and be like them. So if you think about who runs Fortune 500 companies, it's generally white cisgender men. So they're looking for speechwriters typically that look like them. I applaud UPS for being willing to hire somebody that they thought was qualified for the job as opposed to looking like the CEO. We have a new CEO at UPS now, but most of my time was spent with the previous CEO who was a typical white male. And not only that, from the South, which is a statement. But we formed a very good relationship, and I think part of the reason that we were able to do that was because once I got in the role, I felt like I'm here. I would do my work a disservice if I didn't do exactly what I tell everybody to do when you're the diverse person. You leverage your diversity. And the way I leveraged my diversity was I often would push on things that he probably would never have thought about. And he didn't always agree with me. I mean, he has said this in public. He goes, Janet doesn't know any boundaries that she's afraid to push. But he always said, I'm a little bit more conservative. But what happens is we meet somewhere in the middle, and the work that we do is amazing. And so that's the benefit of having somebody like a speechwriter who's different from you, because the words that I created for him were words he might not normally have said, but I think words that were very powerful out there in the world.
Yeah, I think very key thing that you have just mentioned, I'll relate it with one of the frustrating moments that I was having today. I was I was screaming and shrieking, and I think at the height of my frustration, because to get somebody to admit, right, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about, yes, something like this would not exist, like what you're saying, right, primarily dominant by white cis men, and that's something that we see everywhere, right? Even in India, if I have to look at it, yes, there's a certain segment, certain profile of individuals who are there on the top, who are making the decisions, and before any change can happen, those very same people have to first admit that yes, something like this is the reality, right? That acceptance and admission has to happen. And for us, because primarily the work revolves around, let's say, an issue like sexual harassment in workplace, I was so frustrated that I said that no, everything is fine, all companies are safe because all the leaders are saying that we don't have any problem. And if the leaders are saying it, then it must be the truth. Then I don't know for whom I'm talking about that sexual harassment needs to be prevented. And when you're saying that, yes, UPS and the leadership, right? That's the first step for any change to happen.
Oh,
Individuals.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And leadership, diversity and inclusion does not happen really through an organization unless the CEO believes in it. It has to be driven from the top. Now, the work gets done throughout the whole company. The work needs to be done at every level. You have to look at the people who are frontline managers who are making decisions day to day, whether it's from hiring, promotions, and project assignment. That's critical. The CEO isn't doing that. But if the CEO and the people at the top, and I would argue that there are a couple of people that have to be tied into this.
Mhm.
You have to have, the CEO has to have a vision and a belief and a willingness to push for it. And then whoever on his direct reports on that level, whoever that person who is in charge of the biggest pieces of the organization, like whether it's operations or whatever that is, whoever's got the most employees, that person, whoever the chief legal person is, and whoever the chief HR person is, those people have to be bought into this. And by buying in, I don't believe, I call myself a diversity pragmatist because I'm not one of those people who talks about doing this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
In this country, we thought slavery was the right thing to do for many, many centuries. So I don't really want to depend on people doing it because it's the right thing to do. I
Yeah.
think you do it in business because it's a smart thing to do. And those same people and all the people that report to the CEO, they have business directives and business strategies that they're accountable for. If diversity and inclusion are part of that, then
Yeah.
they will be accountable for it and they will see to it that it happens.
Yeah, and somewhere the leaders, I truly believe that the leaders are also struggling. I've seen three categories of leaders completely blinded and living in their own silos, wherein what is diversity, what is inclusion, how does it even matter? Oh, are you talking about some social work or social impact? No, no, it's got nothing to do with the business. That's one category. Second category, who have become aware and do realize the importance of D&I in the workplace, and somewhere are struggling to implement and adopt it because there's a blind spot somewhere wherein they don't know how to connect the dots of D&I with business directors. And then there's a third category of individuals who have figured it all out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and good for them, because it's an evolution, right? Each one is walking their journey. I think those are the most those are the low hanging fruits, I would say. Those are the ripe leaders which are out there. Those are the mature leaders which are out there who are making things happen, who have invested time in learning about it, getting people like you and me on board on the organization to say that, hey, we know we need it and please come and fix it, or
And I think part of the problem, first of all, I think your characterization of those three groups is spot on. And I think part of the problem is it's the way we talk about it. We do talk about it often as, we should do it because it's the right thing to do. As long as you keep it in that realm, it stays subjective. And as long as it's subjective, it is subject to being somewhat ignored, certainly being deprioritized. And unfortunately, it's also subject to all the vagaries that come with what makes challenging talking about this anyway: unconscious bias, historical belief systems. You got to get it out of that. I mean, when we talk about things like sales quotas
Mhm.
or value systems, anything that we consider in the business realm, we don't talk about them subjectively. We put some hard numbers there. We say, this is the goal. We figure out why we need it. We look at the problems we're trying to solve, and we put resources behind it, and we determine the level of those resources based on the size of the problem, which is generally has something to do with the bottom line. We do all that sort of objective thinking about it, but then we take diversity and inclusion and put it over here in the feels good category.
Yeah.
And we know what happens in the feels good category. When stuff gets tight, that goes away. And if you throw in there the fact that people are unconsciously biased, and racism, and you have sexism, with ableism, all the isms, you throw those in there, If diversity and inclusion has to get over those hurdles, it doesn't happen. So to your point, those people in the middle, the ones who don't think it has anything to do with them, they're going to take a little bit more pushing. But those people in the middle who understand it and have heard the language, they need to be talked to with a different language. They need to hear, they need to understand how it connects. And part of the way you do that is you need people who can always make that connection. And those of us who are in the position to talk about this in our companies need to stop talking about it as social justice. Social justice is an issue that corporations need to care about, because I believe that companies are the ones that have the power and the footprint to change that in the world. But within their own walls, this is not a social justice issue. This has to be a business issue. And making that connection is part of what we do. And we have to school ourselves to talk about it in a different way.
No, very true. Talking about it, Jared, I don't even think 90% of the diversity and inclusion conversation is actually about explaining what it means, right? For the longest time, as long as I have been working, right? Every time people have taken D and I as a single concept, right? Wherein you need to separate them. Diversity is one thing, inclusion is completely different. The who you are and the how you are needs to be separated clearly.
Diversity is a numbers game. Inclusion is about impact. Yeah. Diversity is something you have. Inclusion is something you do. You have to be intentional to stop diversity with the way demographics are going. You'd have to intentionally decide not to have it, but you have to be intentional. Yeah. But you have to be intentional to start inclusion. That doesn't happen organically. They are very different. I always say that diversity is bodies in the building. It's a numbers game. You can count those people. Yeah. Inclusion, and people say, well, you can't measure inclusion. Well, yes, you can. It's a little bit harder.
Right? It's hard, but you can.
Yeah, but you can. Yeah, absolutely you can. But what it requires is a commitment to really caring about it. Because if all you're doing is counting the bodies in the building, and then when you decide, first of all, you got to decide what's the right number. You know, how do you know that you've gotten it right? Is it 30%? Is it 0.3%? What's a good diversity number? Right. And in what categories? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to just interrupt you there. That what are we counting, right? Traditionally, we end up counting the number of women, right? And that also cis women, right? We're not even talking women of color right now, women of race and religion right now. We're not even talking about straight women, cis women plus trans women. We are not even going there. So just if I take one single small element of diversity and put it as women, even there we are completely missing the point. So back to you, what are we counting is also completely misplaced.
That's right. And the question is, what should we be counting? Now, if we take it out of the realm of, like I say, take it out of the realm of social justice, excuse me, and put it in the realm of business, you have to ask yourself, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. What are you solving for? Excuse me, let me drink a little something. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Because that determines what type of diversity you need.
Yeah.
And we never want to talk about it that way. My voice is going crazy. I'm sorry.
Listen, just drink water properly. You're not.
I go for coffee.
Get water then.
Okay, I'll sound a little weird for a minute, but it'll straighten out. The question is, what are we solving for? If you don't know, number one, what your vision is for diversity, what a diverse organization looks like for you, and that's going to be different depending on what your organization is. You go back to the business goals. What are your goals?
Right.
That determines what your diverse organization looks like. Then what do you need? I mean, it is possible, I suppose, theoretically, that you can be an organization where the problems you were solving did not require the input of certain groups.
Yeah.
Now, realistically, I know that that's only the case if you only are trying to reach one audience. And that's not realistic. Most businesses have to reach a wide audience. But let's say you only had to talk to women. You could argue that your diversity only needed to include women. But to your point, even within that, were you only talking to cis gender women of a certain income level and a certain background. If that's what you can say, if your target audiences are that distinct, then yeah, maybe you don't need but one kind of diversity. But let's face it, that's not the reality in most cases. So not knowing what kind of diversity you have and not identifying up front what type of diverse input you need means that you just take diversity as sort of this broad category. And that's my issue, and has been, with the sort of the development of this word diversity. We when we first started talking about difference in the workplace, in this country, it was with the civil rights movement. 50 some odd years ago, when we started making, that's when we first started making the business case for diversity here. We talked about race back then because that was the big issue. Women weren't getting jobs really. So we talked about race, and we put quotas in place because we knew that that's where we had to address it. Eventually it became an issue of gender, and eventually has grown from there. But now we've taken diversity and we've put it back in the fuzzy logic realm, where we say, well, it's diversity of thought, it's diversity of outlook. Okay, you know what? You could have 3 white guys in a room and have diversity of thought. Okay, you can have that. That doesn't move the needle. So
I've
getting
heard
back
that
to that,
a lot. I've heard that a lot from people, wherein they say we do not have visible diversity, but we have diversity of this. And
yeah, and it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, that's basic. We know that, all right. That's duh. That's a duh. And so what I think you have to do though is you have to look at it and say, I believe in differentiated diversity, and that means identifying what the people are in your organization, identifying what you're solving for, and then connecting how those people can help you solve for it. I mean, companies now, many companies have these employee resource groups, and they call them different things. You know, in the beginning, they were affinity groups, and they were all about having the disaffected group have a place to be comfortable. Okay, they grew from that to become employee resource groups, where they were places where people could find ways to help move through the company. Then they became business resource groups. Okay, so if you truly got a business resource group, how can you have a business resource group if you don't know how they're a resource to you? Exactly. So that's partially on the groups, you know, it's partially the group's responsibility to figure out how to make themselves, you know, to make themselves that, but it's also on the company to say, how can they be a resource to us? Well, you can't answer that question with general diversity exploration. You got to look at an individual group and say, how does this particular group, whether it's the African American resource group, whether it's a Latino group, whether it's the women's group, how can they help us? And once companies start doing that, they'll really start leveraging this diversity. But it goes back to, you got to know what you're solving for.
Exactly. And that's where you have to go back to the drawing board, and then you have to actually be able to kind of face yourself as an organization, who you are, and you know, what exactly is the kind of personality, what's the buildup of this entity that you call yourself as an organization. And I'm not sure, while there are some very good examples of leaders out there, companies which are doing it. I mean, Procter and Gamble was able to do that. There are some companies out there which are able to claim that, but even there, the diversity is still limited to women, right? And we still do not know any further ones, right? So the world is still busy when we talk about D&I together as gender, and gender is equivalent to woman, and woman is equal to cis woman, and that's the standard line of thought that is being pursued. So to get companies to understand and leaders to understand that there's a whole lot of diversity that you can aim for and target. When you, I mean, any business, what you said a while ago, any business, the minute you intend to become global, you need to have a team internally which is ready to communicate like that, think like that, empathize with your target users, create solutions for them, speak in their language, so much more. And but such a basic and common sense thing, when right now even I'm saying it, and every time I say it to anybody, right? I mean, if you want to sell to somebody, you need to know how to speak to them, how to connect with them. The best way to know that is to have somebody similar to them, speak to them, who gets them.
And the problem is, of course, the reason we still have to say this, the reason it's not painfully obvious, is because the people who are making the decisions or not making the decisions, because not doing something is a decision as well, believe that they are the standard.
Yeah.
They are the standard. They're the standard by which everything else is judged. If you're the person who is the standard, you don't see any difference or any need for a difference. You only have to be the person who's a deviation from the standard to know that you are the deviation, and therefore you can recognize that has been established as a standard. So unfortunately, and that's where diversity comes in, where it's sort of like it's a cycle, it's a circle, because you need the diversity there to tell you what's not the standard. And then but if you're the standard, you have to decide that. So that's where the courageous side of this comes in. Somebody has to be brave enough to be that first person that says, you know what, maybe it's not my opinion and my place and my station, maybe that's not the only one. So you need that. And that's why I say it starts at the top, because it starts with those people saying, we know that we may be the standard, but we're not the only. And we have to look past what our perceptions are.
Yeah. What's the challenge, Janet, do you think that companies, because it's easy to blame it on money, right? That's the simplest thing to blame it on. Oh, we don't have the budget, right? That's the easiest thing to say, because you can't look into their bank accounts and say that, hey, you do have the money, right? And we're talking
exactly.
Biggest of the brands, biggest of the companies, and to be very honest, in all our conversations, we don't praise the good companies because they've already done good work. They don't need any praising. They're getting everything that they're. But the focus is always on the ones who are non-converted yet, right?
Right.
This is one of the biggest and the most common reason that you hear. We don't have the budget. That's number one. Number two, it's not a priority this year. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, we do not know where to begin from, right? So the third one we have basically taken care of. If you have to start from somewhere, wherever you can start from, right? There is a strategy in place. But is it really that expensive to work on becoming a diverse and then an inclusive workplace, right? Is it really that expensive a fear?
Resources will have to be deployed. We know that. You're going to have to deploy resources. It is as expensive as you are committed to it. It's like anything else. Is there any problem, any initiative, any pursuit, any value that you choose to support that you can do for free? No, because even if you use internal resources, you're taking those resources away from something and redeploying them. So there's always going to be some resource commitment. And it comes down to, how serious are you? At the end of the day, how serious are you? And it's okay to say we aren't serious. It's okay to say we don't care about this. It's okay to say, this is not important to us, but that's what you're saying. Quite honestly, as a company, if you say we don't have the budget, then I'll ask, well, what do you have the budget for? What is your budget being spent on? So, because where your money goes is where your priorities are. So what you're saying is this is not a priority. That's okay. Just say that. But what you're not going to do is say this is a priority, but we don't have the money for it, because you do. You absolutely do. And you if you truly don't have the money, then you find other ways to do it, because there are other ways.
There are so many ways. There are so many ways, right? I mean, I had these same conversations with leaders wherein we don't have the budget for it, and that's exactly the question that I've asked them, that what is the budget that you have, right? Because help me understand, it cannot be zero. Having the zero budget means that the company has no money, right? That means that this Friday the party is not going to be thrown, or the next outstation conference is not going to be in some amazing place, and so many things, right? That's what it means to not to have budget, right? But that brings us to the other part of it, the second part of it, right? That generally it's expected that you have to do everything at one go. and I do believe, right? Correct me if I'm wrong here, could be a counter thought also, that when you have to go all out to become diverse, and then you have to become inclusive also, right? Um, Either you go all out, which would mean that you reach each and every person. It's a large
Hmm.
project, and you cannot do it half-heartedly. You cannot make an a super amazing announcement one day and then not see it through. There is
Hmm.
somewhere, I believe there's that fear that this is a journey which we cannot do half-heartedly. It's better to not to even start on this journey than to do it midway, because the consequences of doing half-hearted work is more severe than not creating any ripples in the water. Like right
Hmm.
now, nobody expects from me as a leader that we are diverse and we want to be inclusive and all those statements, right? But the minute I introduce this concept to my team and I
Hmm.
don't make it happen, and my team does not feel that, then there are bigger consequences. What are your thoughts on that? Is the fear real? Is this something that people should be thinking about?
I think most leaders want a legacy. And depending on when they come into this work, how close they are to leaving, positions determines how serious they are about their legacies. So diversity and inclusion can be a really good legacy builder if it works. And so, yes, if it fails, you have your legacy at stake, you have the company's reputation at stake, you have all those things. But so I do think that there probably is some fear out there. But I would argue that you got to get over that, because the thing is this: if that's the case, then you never do anything. You
That's
know, what other things as a company do you risk? If you are truly risk averse, then you won't be around much longer anyway. And the bottom line is,
that's true.
doing, not doing it is a bigger risk
Yeah,
than doing it and not doing it as far as you want. But I will say once again,
yeah.
if you start off with a vision of what a diverse and inclusive company looks like, no
Hmm.
matter where you start, because a couple of things. First, you have to have a vision, okay? And once you know this is where we're trying to go, this is what a diverse and inclusive organization for me might look like. I have X number of women sitting in positions that
Hey,
make real decisions.
Janet, can I interrupt you?
Of
Let's
course,
see that picture. How does a diverse and inclusive company looks like? Let's
it
envision
depends
that.
on it depends on the company, and it may depend. And if you're a company, let's say for me, let's say my company is, I want the representation of women
Mm-hmm.
in positions of power. We as a company decide that positions of power are the senior director level. Get real specific. Here's a question. You start off with, what does a good organization look like? What does a powerful organization look like me, period? Okay, so if I say that it is the positions of power, the high positions of power are CEO and direct reports, I want 50% of my direct reports to be women, because women make up 50% of the population in the world. That's what I want. I want it to be reflective. Let's just say that's a very simplistic way of looking at it.
Right.
Then I want to have women in all the positions going down at every level. I want it 50%. That's what I want. Simplistic. Okay, so that's your vision. And I don't just want them in those positions. I want them working on what we consider the most high profile and the most impactful assignments and projects. And I
Hmm.
want them to be able to control budgets at this level, because that's what success looks like. See, if men do it, we consider them successful. I
Yeah.
want women doing those same things. Okay. And and you can see that's going to be different for every company.
Yeah.
So let's say I now have this vision. Well, then if you have a vision, the only way you realize that vision is you have to build steps to it. So then it comes to asking the difficult questions. All right, what did it take for this man to get to this position? What does it take for a man to get to this level? All right, why are women not doing it? And then you start getting your answers. Well, there aren't that many of them. Okay, then I need to be looking at recruitment and hiring. Well, and when they get into the company, they don't advance. Okay, then I need to look at development. I need to look at why that's not happening. I need to ask some difficult questions. I need to go find the women who are here and figure out why they haven't moved up.
Yeah.
I need to figure out the ones who did move up, what was different for them. It is all that. It is examining all those things, and then it is fixing it at every point of the way. So when I say that you need a vision, then I say the next thing you need is some real data. You cannot make these kind of decisions by going around and pointing and counting and making sort of these anecdotal decisions. You need data. So when you talk about the things that you have to commit to this effort, data is a huge one. You have to commit to caring enough to ask the difficult questions, demand the difficult answers, and then put in place accountability, because that's the third thing you need, accountability. Somebody's butt has to be on the line to make this happen. And the thing is, I'm not saying anything that any successful company doesn't do in any other area. It's just when you get diversity and inclusion, people start getting stupid. They start suddenly forgetting how a business works.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, we don't know how to do this. Yes, you do. If you've been in business for more than 5 minutes, you have figured out how to do these very same things with other parts of your business. So just put diversity and inclusion in the same path, and you can get it done.
It is easy, actually. I once saw a company tracking their coupons, lunch coupons, and how they are reimbursed, right down to the last person who was actually taking care of their cleaning department. Right down to that person. And this was a company of about like 5,800 employees or so. And they were able to do that because there's a cost associated with it. So it's not as if it's not possible, right? It is.
Right, decision.
Right. The whole point is that when you're touching on these points, these resources, what information are you looking at collecting, right?
Exactly.
And
just counting people doesn't tell you anything. I take that back. It does tell you something, but it could tell you, okay, if we have a vision and we say 50% and we count and we only have 1% of our employees are women, okay, then we know we have a problem. But that's all the answer you get from that. That's the only answer, is that you have a starting place, because you do have to know where you're starting. So yeah, you count diversity numbers, you count the numbers, and then what? But most people stop there. They go, okay, we have 0.3%. What are we going to do now? And so that's what I'm saying. So that is a metric. It is a metric. It is not the metric. It's not even the most important metric, because even if you don't know what you have, you know what you got to get to.
Yeah.
And you can start going for that no matter what, if you start it right there. But so yeah, that's the metric most people stop at, and that's probably the least valuable metric you can have. But it is a metric. It's an important one, but it's not the most important one.
There's so many of them out there, right? And that's what I think. In the beginning, if a company chooses what kind of diversity we want to have, then it makes it easy for them. What is it that we are going to now measure? Right? Instead of collecting each and every possible thing out there. I mean, we have been working on diversity profile for companies, and there are about 26 different metrics that you can actually count in an organization at any given point in time to understand what kind of diversity they have. It's not just one, it will be multiple. You just have to see what all exists for that company. Right? But it's very important for companies to first know this, right? Even what you want to measure, and not just go around counting men, women, men, women, men, women, and okay, that's done.
Because what does that tell you, actually? What does that really tell you? I mean, in context, that's the issue. It's like, you got to ask yourself, okay, so I know this, but what can I do with that? And that's why people stop, and that's why they go, I don't know what to do. Well, I would argue that you don't know what to do because you're not asking the right questions. And you got to start with that.
I remember one time I went for a meeting, and this company was actually asking that, hey, Pallavi, we are not able to, hire women in our team. And they actually did not have a single woman in their team. Mainly the conversation was they had to form a committee in which they needed a senior woman to head that committee. And we were struggling that how do we form this committee, which is part of a compliance, without having a senior woman in place. And that got me curious that, hey, you're a 20-year-old organization, you still don't have a woman in place. How come? Right? Really curious. They said, no, they apply, they come for interviews, but nobody bothers joining. I said, okay, nobody has ever joined, or some have joined, but then they had left after some time. So no one actually stayed and grew. And after 2 hours meeting, I asked them, can I use the washroom? Right. And then they said that somebody will have to go with you. I said, why will someone need to come with me to the washroom? right? And they were like, because it's in the next floor. I said, sure, I'll walk down and I will use the washroom. They said, no, but it's not our office. In our office, we don't have a washroom for women. So we take the services from the offices next in the floor, and
Light bulb.
light was right. And they were like, and for me it was like, this is it. This may not be the only thing, but this is one of the key things. And
Mhm.
they said we were thinking of making one as in when a woman will stay, whereas the problem is it's such a basic thing that if I am not getting it there, right, don't give me food, don't give me a decent chair, give me, this is part of the dignified work, dignity at workplace, you give me a clean washroom. And that's the
Exactly.
same problem that we see with so many aspects, Janet. For example, people are trying to hire people with disability, and making these communication claims that we want to, we want to be the employer of choice. Similarly, when we talk about trans community, LGBTQ community, everybody wants to hire them now. In India,
Mhm.
recently, we just passed a law also, which now tells employers that they cannot discriminate against trans members. So everyone wants to do it, everyone communicates it, but somewhere something is going wrong because the infrastructure, policies, processes are not aligned with it, right?
Mhm.
So my question to you is, this is a chicken and egg theory, right? Do you
Mhm.
make a declaration first and then start fixing? Do you fix things first and then companies are worried that what if nobody shows up, like we do everything amazing and nobody shows up, right? So the communication, timing, and how to communicate when we talk about your intent to showcase yourself as a DNI leader or a DNI employer of choice.
Well, I think that the answer is you kind of got to do both, um, because it is, like you said, a chicken egg dilemma, isn't it? But the reality is if you start down the path of saying that you want to be, if you really are serious that you want to be inclusive, things like not having a washroom could get clear really quick. Because the first thing is you got to have diverse voices in the room to help you make these decisions. And the point is that yes, if you truly have no diverse voices in your organization, you might have to hire a consultant. But I think that part of it is you start talking to the people who are in your organization. You go to the people who are there because they know better than anybody else what's wrong
Yeah.
in your organization. But you got to make them safe to answer those questions. You got to ask the right questions. You got to be willing to get the answers. If all you want is somebody to give you the right answers to make you feel good, you're not serious about this. If you're
Right.
serious about this, you take the hits. You have those women who say, well, you know what? I have to walk up a second floor to go to a restroom. That's a problem for me. And so then when you start talking about you want to fix it, that's something you're going to fix automatically. It happens all at the same time. So the question is, where do you start? You start with the people who are there.
Hmm.
Start with you ask the questions in house, because like I said, since everybody's vision is going to be different based on the company, who better to help you shape it than the people who are there, who are
Yep.
living. And so if you aren't talking to the people that you have, that's a loss. That's a mistake. That's a missed opportunity, because they'll tell you. I mean, if you go ask people within UPS what they don't like, what they'd like to see change, most of them will tell you. And you start with them, because what if you can fix it in house, then you start bringing people in. That's a whole hurdle that you don't have to worry about. And it's just interesting that you say that about the restroom, because I've actually been in businesses that didn't have them on the floor, or they were on the other end of the floor. And you kind of walk around and go, do you have any women working here? Have you asked them if they're okay with this? And I've been on executive floors where they don't have women's restrooms on the executive floor. And it's like, well, then, and you wonder why you don't have anybody here. Because if I come in and see this, and I always talk about the journey of why. If
Hmm.
you have an issue, you start asking why. And you keep why in your way. Just like you say when you ask them, the question of, well, why don't you have any women here making the decision? Well, there's none that have applied. Well, why? Well, they do apply, but they don't get the job. But why? and you just keep wiring your way down, eventually you'll get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
You'll probably even get to the person who's the problem, because a lot of times it's one or two people that are in charge of that. And it's like, you know what? We keep getting to the why, and it keeps coming back to you. So maybe you need to go. And, but yeah, I call it the journey of why. If you get on that journey, you'll eventually get to the right answer.
No, that's true. I know exactly. I mean, there's so many situations from my own life that I can remember right now where the same thing has played out. Hey, Janet, are you here? Okay, just going to wait for Janet to come back.
There.
No, I think I was just laughing at this whole thing because there were so many situations I could remember from my experience where this is so relatable. But wow, this washroom, such a nuanced topic, and yet such a common sense thing, and yet such a basic thing, and yet it does not exist.
It does not.
Does not. I mean, don't do anything but just fix the washroom. I mean, I've lost count of the number of conversations I've had with leaders on washroom. Like imagine arguing about put a washroom in place, be it for people with disability, be it for people when we talk about different gender representation, put a washroom in place. Basic.
It's basic. I mean, and it goes back to, again, you have to be willing to challenge your perception of reality. We things that reality is relative. It's relative to your position. If you are the people who are the standard, your reality is based on being that standard. You have to be willing to say that maybe what I believe to be reality is a perspective. And that's a hard thing to do.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was asking, what are your thoughts on Anonymous Helpline? It's become a big hit, right? And while it's understandable when it comes to whistleblower, it makes a lot of sense for so many different reasons. But we are witnessing Anonymous Helpline being used for various purposes, especially, if somebody has a grievance, they should use this Anonymous Helpline to raise it, right? And what does it reflect, Janet, about an organization which, because I'm still divided in my head about it, right? While I appreciate this intent that you want to invite different comments, inputs from anybody without fear of, disclosing their identity. But what does it speak when we talk about the culture and feeling of inclusiveness in an organization when a medium like Anonymous Helpline is being put together? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily hurts, but I don't know that it is the ultimate way that you want to do this. Because, first of all, unless the organization's humongous, the people who are going to call in on an anonymous hotline, you can eventually figure out, based on what they're saying, who they are.
That's true.
And how are you going to fix it if it's truly anonymous and you truly don't know where the problem is? Then it's general information. I go back to the fact that you need real data. And you only get real data from identifying where the real problems are. So yes, most of the stuff you're going to get on an anonymous hotline are people who, first of all, trust that it's anonymous. And I think a lot of people don't really trust that this stuff is anonymous. If you need that, you probably have an organization that there's not a lot of trust there. So the people who really have an issue that you might be able to do something, or that issues that are really egregious, probably aren't calling it because they really don't trust it. So let's say you get the people who do decide that they want to trust it. If they're not, I doubt that anything you're going to hear is any surprise to anybody. You know this stuff. You know this stuff happened.
Yeah.
If it's something that is, if it's an issue of something that's been happening that is something that you can adjudicate, then all you can do is tell people you should go to HR with this, you should go to HR. If they don't feel like they can do that, if they feel like the only way they can talk is anonymously, then you don't have an inclusive culture. Okay, so we know this. And if you're trying to build it, like I said, it can't hurt. You might get a gem every now and then, but the reality is where the real decisions are made and where the real change is created, it does not happen anonymously.
That's true. Very quickly, Janet, let's praise some amazing companies, even if you don't want to name them. There are moments when you walk into a certain place and you, even as a customer or as a visitor, you suddenly feel that I belong, or they want me to belong, or it's almost like they have created this space because I feel like a part of my need has been taken care of, right? Three situations, I'm throwing three, but if there are more, please feel free, wherein you witness that they got inclusion right. Not about diversity, because diversity will still have to look into their numbers and everything, but they got inclusion right.
Well, it's tough for me to answer that because typically when I personally come in, and this would be back in my days because I've only been at UPS for about 3 years. Before that, I spent 20 years as an independent. So I went to a lot of different companies because I was an independent. And when I come in, I'm the hired gun that they've called in. So of course, I feel comfortable there usually. So let me answer that question slightly differently. I know that there are companies that have put their money where their mouths are and have said, we're going to build an inclusive company. And there's one that I often point to, and this is inclusion from a racial standpoint, but it's a company here, it's a bank, JP Chase, when their CEO, who happens to be a bit of a celebrity CEO, so he kind of has, people are going to argue he can do whatever he wants and he won't get fired. That may be true, but he got that way because he had good results. But anyway, he decided that they had an issue with diversity in their company. And so he starts looking at the numbers and he says, we're not doing a great job anywhere, but with women, we've done a better job than we have with others. Where we really are doing a bad job is with, Black people. So he went to his direct reports. He went to them and said, I need you to go find a Black person, have lunch with them, and figure out how to promote them. And you let me know if you can't find a Black person. And of course, nobody can tell the CEO that. So they went and found some people. But he didn't stop there. He then said, all right, how are we going to institutionalize this change that needs to be made? So he found a woman in the organization who he knew he could do the job, and he asked her, go build me a program. And they built a program called Advancing Black Leaders. It has had phenomenal responses. I think they doubled the number of Black people in positions of promotionability, who are in position of power. They doubled it in 3 years, something like that. They increased it 9% in the first year. But what that shows to me is I saw a problem. First of all, I realized I needed to care about this. So I started looking at the numbers. I had numbers that I could look at. That's where counting the bodies in the building counted. He could look at it. And he goes, but I don't stop at just counting them. I said, okay, so what am I going to do? I've decided this number's a problem. Let me correct it. I went to the people who could make the decisions, the people who were in the power. I didn't just make a blanket statement that says, oh, this is an issue we need to deal with. I went to people and made them accountable to me as the big guy and said, go fix it. But then I recognized that just asking individuals to fix it depended on an individual doing it. No, I needed to put processes and procedures and structures in place to institutionalize and make this sustainable and repeatable and scalable. So I found somebody who was qualified within our environs, because then they understand our business, and said, go build me a program. And here's a couple of $1 million. I put resources behind it to go build the program. And then I came back and I looked at those numbers. And I have expanded that program. I've changed that program. I've morphed that program to make sure those numbers continue. That little example is what every company needs to do. So yeah, if I were working at JP Chase right now, I think I'd be comfortable there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. One question that led to this whole thing, right? Just asking a question or being being conscious about, I think this is what we mean by conscious leadership anyway, to be able to look around your boardroom or your conference room and see that who do I have here? um,
Yes.
do I have visible, you know, sorry, that was my dog. He was growling at me.
That's
Do
his life.
Yeah, we'll come to COVID also. We'll come to COVID as well. But just a second. Hey, close the door. So sorry, Janet.
It's okay.
For a leader to be able to look around and realize that, you know, that who are the people that I'm relying, you know, who are the next in line, and where the growth is happening, not waiting for, I think, the HR to come and tell them that, hey, something is amiss. I think that's what usually happens. Leaders rely on HR. HR is waiting for leader to set that mandate, and both of them are waiting for somebody to come and tell something, and then
Exactly.
take the action. Right? There's a kind of a blind spot that exists, wherein you do not know what you're missing out on, and there's also this waiting game that continues happening. It's getting deeper now with the COVID-19. Everybody, the whole of the economy across the world has been hit. And once again, two minds, two schools of thoughts, two arguments that are coming out, that now companies would have realized the value of having women as team members, you know.
Mhm.
Now companies will not force this whole stereotypical requirement of how an ideal employee or our rock star employee should look like, somebody who comes in every day to office and doesn't
Mhm.
care about family and a lot of other things, with a certain segment also in terms of profile, be it age, race, gender, everything else. All that is going to get busted and no longer going to be the same definition that companies' leaders used to look for. And then at the same time, we have not seen the biggest, this is the first time that we have seen the biggest dip in the unemployment rate of women also in the past couple of months, right?
Mhm.
What do you think, in your observation, is going to happen to the whole case of DNI? And now I'm just talking about women only, right? Because
Mhm.
we don't even know where the other numbers are. We don't even know how the rest of the minorities are actually taking it. I'll be very honest, even in India right now and Southeast Asia, I have no idea what's happening to any other diversity segment other than women, because that's
Mhm.
the first thing. Even UN, every time they talk about UN women, you know, every time they talk about diversity and inclusion, they're also capturing just women as a gender.
Mhm.
So we don't even have the data around that. But if we have to just see that the minute we talk about key roles, key positions, rock star employees, and everything else, how are the years going to be? Do we see a positive impact, or do we see two steps backward or 20 years backward?
I think we are in danger of going backwards for a couple of reasons. Part of what has helped women in the workplace is visibility.
Yeah.
So we're not visible. We're not in the room anymore. I mean, you might be on the Zoom call, but you're not visible. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is, like it or not, women in every culture are the caregivers.
Yeah.
You know, women are the ones who maintain the home. We always have 6 and 7 jobs. So taking that burden, and it was bad enough to try to balance it,
Yeah.
but now you don't have the resources. So even if you had children, for example, and you worked, you don't have caregivers. The kids are home. And and I know there are plenty of male partners who are 50%, but they're rarer than the ones who aren't. Women
Very
take
rare.
on,
I don't know where they are, by the way.
yeah,
But
yeah, I don't know them either. But I mean, but women take on the role of caregiver and nurturer, and just that. So you take that and you put us firmly in that space, and then economics come in. And if you have two breadwinners and one of you has to devote more time there, it's just a problem. So yes, I think we are significantly at risk.
Hmm.
for undoing some of the good that we've done. What advances we've made. I think we are significantly at risk. I think it's already happening. So I can only hope that we keep talking about that, and we have got to drive that home, and we've got to let people know, because this is the issue with diversity anyway, and the difference between equality and equity. Equality says we're all in this COVID mess together, and it's affecting all of us, and everybody's working at home, and it sucks because your internet line goes down, your dog growls at you, and your kids come in
Yes.
behind you. Everybody has this problem. And equality, the equality argument says we just have to all live with it. The equity reality says it is not the same for all of us, and
Yeah.
that some of us are affected differently. And so the only way if we truly want inclusive organizations, then we have to recognize that there are different situations for everybody, and we have to work towards fixing it and making it, we have to level the playing field. Because when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, one of the reasons I don't like those words, even though I use them because they're the standard, is we forget that diversity, inclusion, and equity are end states. They are goals. There has to be something, they are nouns. There has to be a verb. There has to be something, there has to be a means to those ends. And the means to that end is leveling. That is the active way you go in and level the playing field so that you can get to equity and inclusion, because you got to do something. You can't just wish those things into existence. They will not happen organically. Somebody has to change what is in order to get to where you want to be. And so this is just, the COVID situation is just shining a bigger light on the inequity that exists. And so I hope that those of us who are serious about this, the companies that are serious about this, actually listen and recognize that you're given an opportunity now to really live what you say you believe.
Some very key statements that you said. When you say diversity, inclusion, and equity, I was thinking die, right? And
Die. That's
I,
what they spell. Diversity, inclusion, equity spelled die.
I think all companies should aspire to die, and before
Well,
they
they should
level the field.
recognize that that's what happens to their, if they don't level, then that's what happens to their inclusion efforts. They die.
Yeah, and that's leveling. It's such an important thing, right? I remember one time I saw, I don't know if it was New York Times, it was doing this meme, this cartoon image was doing its round about what is equality, equity, opportunity, and all these things. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and quite apparent, and it went viral, and everyone seemed to get it that yes, what it means, what equality means, and what equity means, and what equal opportunity means, and everything else. That's the journey that you're talking about, right? That you become diverse. You just don't
Mm-hmm.
say we are diverse and it happens. You
Right.
become inclusive. You don't just say one day that we are inclusive and that it happens. Same thing for equality, same thing for equity, right? Before that, a lot of preparation needs to be done, and that's the path that companies need to be on. I'm definitely
It's ongoing. Equity and inclusion are not, they don't stop. You never become an inclusive organization. You are always becoming
you're always
an inclusive organization, because the dimensions of diversity are going to continue to change. I
yeah.
mean, we talk about, especially in this country, we talk about the fact that by 2050, we won't have the same, we will have a mixed race population. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to have a different perspective than the individual do. So that's going to change. As we, despite some of what's going on here with immigration is going to continue. So you're going to have people coming in, globalization is going to continue, and you're going to have different demographics and different populations. It's always going to change.
Yeah.
So you can never be inclusive. You are always becoming inclusive. It is a never-ending journey. And that shouldn't scare people, because if you go back to the business argument, businesses don't get this monolithic one way, we don't change. They always are adapt, at least the ones that survive. The ones that don't survive didn't adapt. So
Yeah.
this is just another adaptation that has to happen. It's a critical one.
No, that's true. And even if physical mobility and migration gets limited, Janet, we are living in a remote world now, right? I mean, companies within one country are hiring people from across different areas of the country. There's global hiring that is happening. This amalgamation of different cultures and different profiles, different experiences, different individuals is inevitable, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you may not want to count the diversity, but you're eventually going to be, you are diverse. The problem is, are you inclusive, or are
Exactly.
you that or not, right?
I say
And
diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice.
oh, there. I used to say truth, but yeah, choice also works. That is true. That is true. One last question, Janet. I know that I'm a little beyond our time, but is it okay if I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Great. So many countries introducing so many laws when it comes to building inclusion and diversity, right? I mean, we have had some of those laws here, no, but none of them are identifying any quota or any particular percentage of people, except for a percentage of women who should be there in the board. There's no other, reservation or any such thing has been there. In addition to that reservation clauses, then there are these laws also that specifically protect certain segment profile of individuals. So for women, we have sexual harassment laws. For thankfully in US, we have equal opportunity guidelines, right? That would cover everything. Um, how much importance do you think these laws and guidelines and policies actually play a role? Because conscious leaders believe we are above and beyond the laws, and it can be made. Whereas for the bare minimum one, these laws, these policies, and laws and policies on one hand, and the second is having a reservation, system that have this much representation, right? If you can
Mhm.
demand or um, demand or say that you should have it at the top, then why are we not boiling it down across the hierarchy? Is this really going to be helpful? Or is this something we should leave for the companies to decide?
No, absolutely not. Because absolutely not. Because I mean, the reality is now, do we need to look at how we maybe modify some of these laws so that companies have some flexibility within them? Yes, and I'm not smart enough to figure that out. I hadn't thought about it. If I think about it, I will. But I absolutely believe you still need laws. People don't like it and they go, oh, quotas. Well, you know what? If there had not been quotas
Yeah,
in the country in the civil rights movement, had there not been quotas in the women's movement, none of us would be here. Because
exactly.
the reality is, people don't want to change. They don't have to change. People, and I mean, I don't want to even get into what political choices are, but when the presidential election was going last year in 2016, and Hillary Clinton was running, she got cornered a little bit into a conversation with some Black Lives Matter movement folks, and they were trying to push her to say something, and she said, "Listen, I can't change hearts, but I can change laws." And I think it was a perfect thing to say. You have to have the policies in place because, once again, if you take it out of the realm of subjectivity, we have laws that say there are things you have to do. And we say that those are laws because we have decided that we as humans just aren't naturally going to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So you have to have laws to say that you're going to do this. They're important. Now, beyond those, because that will get your bodies in the building. That
Yeah.
will get your diversity numbers where they need to be. Beyond that is where a company has the responsibility to do more if they care about being inclusive. But my attitude is, I don't care whether you care or not. I want you to care. I think the companies that do care will be most successful. But at the end of the day, you have to do there's a certain level that you're just going to have to hit. And I believe those laws were necessary in the first place. If they weren't necessary, we would have never had them.
No, they are
They
necessary.
didn't do it necessary.
Absolutely. Right. And with you completely on this one, because when we hear leaders and when we hear, counter arguments telling us that we should believe in the goodness of the leaders, the problem is if there is a good leader, and here's always my response that, hey, if there's a good leader, they would have no objection to this. And
And good is relative. Good is relative. And good assumes that you are aware. You can be the nicest person on the planet, but you're completely oblivious to this. And your company will fail because you're oblivious. Doesn't mean you're not a good person.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
Right. And if as a good leader, you were anyway going to do this, that I don't need a law to tell me, then just ignore the law and still do whatever is required to be done, because you were anyway going to do this. And
Mhm.
if you're not going to do this, that's where this law becomes handy, because we do need representation in every aspect of the economy where decisions are being made. And if it is not going, you cannot wait. I cannot wait. I would have not been here sitting talking to you if certain things, certain fights have not happened in the past time.
Exactly.
And this
Exactly.
will not happen for so many other people if this will not be enforced in one way or the other. And that's exactly what is required. You cannot wait for evolution to kick in for these things to come into picture. So
Because even when you get the numbers, you don't change the power structures, because a very small number of people in the right positions can wield power over a lot of other people. They can wield a lot of power. They can yield unfair advantage over a lot of people. So numbers aren't going to just get it. People who believe that, oh well, once the demographics change, this will naturally change. No, because you have to upset the power structure, and you upset the power structure by intentionally deciding to change the power structure, and that threatens the people in power. It just does, and there's no way you can say that. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that if other people were in power, they might feel the same way. If women ruled the world, would we want to give up power any more than? No, we probably would not. I'd like to believe we're better, but we might not be. We wouldn't want to give it up here. But so what has to happen is all this lip service we give to the value of diversity, we got to really believe it. If you truly believe in the value of diversity, then you have to recognize that sometimes you got to shift things in order to make that happen.
With that note, I sometimes when you actually want diversity to happen, you have to shift things, build a larger table, bring extra chairs, accommodate. Some people stand up if there are not extra chairs. But we need more and more diversity on the table where decisions are being made, and that's something that we have to constantly keep grilling. Constantly.
Exactly.
There's so much that I did not get to talk to you about, Janet. I'm surprised. We've spoken for almost like 70 minutes now. But I wanted to talk to you about bias. I wanted to talk to you about, different kind of aspects of blind spots that exist in the organization. I wanted to talk to you about hiring structure and breaking.
We have to do this again. We just have to do it again.
We have to do this again. We have to. I mean, right after ending this, I'm writing an email to you for the next slot, because these are all such. These are building blocks, right? We are talking about fixing the DNA of an organization and where they should be starting from, and we have to do this again.
We do. Just send me an email. We'll get it scheduled. I'd love to.
I will do that. I will do that. Janet, this was so amazing. I don't think I've had so much fun, as well as I have laughed and internalized and related so much with the scenarios that we were talking about. I feel so charged even at 9:45 here in India.
Good.
This is the best Friday evening that I have had in the longest time. I can't tell you how good it has been. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I look forward to the next one.
You please do. I will look forward to it more than you. But you have an amazing day. Stay safe, and lots of love all the way.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.